God is dead. 3 words. No footnote, no framing, no comfort. Just the sentence that would follow one philosopher into every dorm room poster, every t-shirt, every internet argument for the next century and a half, and means something almost the opposite of what all of them think it means. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote that line in 1882 in a book called The Gay Science. He was 37, mostly friendless, and living out of suitcases in cheap boarding houses across Switzerland and Italy. A decade earlier, he'd been the youngest professor of classical philology ever appointed at the University of Basel. A genuine prodigy, hired before he'd even finished his doctorate. By his mid-30s, his body had forced him out of that life entirely. Migraines put him in bed for days at a time. His eyesight was failing so badly that he sometimes couldn't read his own handwriting, and he wrote much of his later work squinting at paper held inches from his face. His stomach rejected most food. He resigned his professorship on a pension and became, in effect, a wanderer, chasing mild climates from town to town, hoping the next one would hurt less. The Gay Science was written during one of the rare stretches when the pain let up enough to work, and the book carries that strange, fragile relief in its title. He meant gay in the old sense, joyful, light on its feet, as if he'd earned the right to a little levity after years of suffering. What he put inside it, though, wasn't a victory lap. It was a warning nobody was ready to hear yet. Picture the scene he actually wrote, because it's stranger and darker than the forward slogan suggests. A madman runs into a crowded marketplace one morning carrying a lit lantern in broad daylight, shouting that he's looking for God. The crowd laughs at him. Half of them don't even believe in God anymore. That's the joke they're making at his expense. So the madman turns on them. God is dead, he says, and we killed him. All of us, together, with our own hands. Then he describes what that actually means, and it isn't relief, it's vertigo. He asks how they intend to wipe away an entire horizon, as if a horizon were something you could simply erase with a rag. He asks what they'll do now that the Earth has come unchained from its sun and is plunging with nothing to hold on to in every direction at once. Backward, sideways, in all directions, he says, with no more up or down. He asks whether it isn't getting colder, whether night isn't closing in from every side. The crowd just stares at him like he's insane, and eventually he smashes his lantern on the ground and admits, almost to himself, that he's come too early. His time hasn't arrived. The deed is done, but the people who did it haven't heard about it yet. The news, he says, is still on its way. That's the part almost nobody quotes, and it's the part that changes everything. Nietzsche wasn't cheering. He was standing in the wreckage of a shared European worldview, one built for over 1,000 years on a Christian moral order, on the assumption that meaning, right and wrong, and purpose all traced back to something outside human beings entirely. Science, secular politics, and Enlightenment rationalism had spent 2 centuries quietly hollowing that foundation out, and by Nietzsche's time, most educated Europeans had stopped genuinely believing in it, even if they still went through the motions. His point was that this wasn't a small update to make. If the foundation goes, everything that used to sit on top of it, objective morality, cosmic purpose, the sense that the universe cares which choices you make, goes with it. He didn't think science could just slide in and do that job instead. Science can tell you what is true. It was never built to tell you what matters, and Nietzsche thought most people hadn't even noticed that gap existed yet. The horror in the passage isn't atheism itself. It's what comes after atheism, once nobody has bothered to build anything to stand on in its place. He wasn't finished with the idea either. He spent much of the rest of his career trying to answer his own question, sketching out concepts like the revaluation of all values, the idea that human beings would eventually have to build new values from scratch, rather than inherit them from religion. But here's the unsettling part. He also made a specific, concrete prediction about what would happen if they failed to do that well. He warned that the coming century would see catastrophic wars fought over ideology, movements that would rush to fill the God-shaped hole, not with careful new values, but with something crude and violent instead. Nationalism, race, the worship of the state. He wrote that decades before the First World War, let alone the Second. It reads less like philosophy and more like a forecast. He didn't just diagnose a wound, he warned people exactly how it would get infected if they left it untreated. And it did. Plenty of his contemporaries pushed back on him regardless. Hard. Theologians accused him of moral vandalism, of tearing a house down with no blueprint for rebuilding it. Fellow philosophers, especially those still loyal to Enlightenment rationalism, thought he was being needlessly apocalyptic. That reason and secular ethics could fill the gap he was so worried about without any crisis at all. Nietzsche wasn't trying to win a debate club argument, though. He wanted people to feel the actual size of the problem before they rushed to patch it over with something comfortable. Whether he was right that nobody else took it seriously enough is still argued over by philosophers today. But the disagreement itself tells you something important. Even the people who thought he was wrong understood he was diagnosing something real, not just being provocative for its own sake. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Walk into a philosophy meme page today and "God is dead" shows up as a mic drop. Smug, victorious, an atheist's version of a chess checkmate against religious belief. Walk into any secondhand bookstore's clearance rack, and you'll find the line stamped on a black t-shirt next to a skull, marketed as edgy nihilism, as if Nietzsche were some kind of original goth mascot. Ask most people what he meant, and you'll usually get some version of he thought religion was fake. A flattening so total it erases the actual argument underneath it. Nietzsche didn't think the death of God was something to be smug about. He thought it was the biggest crisis Europe had ever faced without noticing it was having one. And he'd already told them, in plain language, how badly it could go. The distortion didn't stop at t-shirts and memes either. It went somewhere far stranger, and Nietzsche never got a say in it. He suffered a severe mental and physical collapse in Turin in January 1889, and he spent his final 11 years in the care of his mother and then his sister, largely unable to write or think clearly before dying in 1900. His sister, Elisabeth Förster Nietzsche, took control of his unpublished notebooks and his entire literary estate after his collapse, and what she did with them is one of the strangest forgeries in philosophy. Nietzsche had, late in life, started sketching notes toward a book he planned to call The Will to Power. He never finished it. He abandoned the project himself, reorganized his priorities, and moved on to other work before his collapse. After his death, Elisabeth went back through his notebooks, thousands of loose fragments written across different years on different topics in different moods, and stitched them together into a single book, complete with chapter headings and a false sense of unified argument. She rearranged his own words to fit a philosophy he had never actually assembled, and one that leaned far closer to the aggressive nationalism and anti-Semitism she believed in than anything Nietzsche had argued while he was capable of arguing. For decades, The Will to Power was read by many people as his masterwork, his final definitive statement. It was, in a very real sense, published under his name after his death by someone editing him into a stranger. That fabricated version is what eventually reached Nazi Germany, where Elisabeth herself cultivated a relationship with the regime and even met Hitler. It took philosophers well into the 20th century, scholars like Walter Kaufmann chief among them, to go back to the actual notebooks, strip out Elisabeth's editorial fingerprints, and demonstrate how far the popular image of Nietzsche had drifted from anything the man himself had written or believed. So the line has now been misread twice over, in two completely different directions. Once by pop culture, which turned a warning into a punchline aimed at people of faith. And once by history, which let it get hijacked by a book he never wrote, edited by someone he distrusted, in service of exactly the kind of tribal, nationalist thinking he'd already predicted and dreaded. Strip away both distortions, and what's left is a man standing alone in a marketplace nobody else can see yet, holding a lit lantern in broad daylight, trying to tell a crowd that the ground just moved beneath them. He wasn't announcing a victory, he was asking whether anyone was going to notice the fall before they hit it, and warning them, specifically, what would come rushing in if they didn't. We still haven't fully answered his question. We just got better at ignoring the warning that came with it.